I'd like to introduce Claire Traub, who's a highly experienced specialist occupational therapist based at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And Claire works across a number of services, including long-term conditions. She also runs cancer-related fatigue management courses at Maggie's Cambridge and has spent time training with the Bath Centre for Fatigue Services. Claire studied occupational therapy at the University of the West of England and is currently doing a master's level course at that same university on managing fatigue and long-term health conditions. We're really pleased to have Claire with us today and really grateful for your time. Fatigue is obviously an issue for a lot of PNH patients, and finding someone like you who has some specialist insights into it is a rarity. So we're really glad that we've managed to find you. Thanks to Sarah, who connected us to you as well. But yes, I'm now going to let you carry on, and if you have trouble sharing your slides, just give me a yell. But do you want to see if that's possible?
So I just wanted to really clarify what we're talking about today, because we're not talking about everyday tiredness. So many of you here are probably experiencing some level of fatigue, and will understand that it's not that sleepiness that you might get when you're just feeling a bit tired. It's not felt around the eyes where your eyes are dropping. It's that sense of heaviness in the limbs, that exhaustion, that weariness. Not just a physical experience, but actually a cognitive one as well. So difficulty concentrating, finding it hard to remember things, that real sense of brain fog. And it can also affect our emotional resilience. So we can feel quite easily overloaded and overwhelmed when we're feeling fatigued. So this is the kind of fatigue we're talking about today, not just everyday tiredness. If you could move forward, please, Maria. So we'll very briefly touch on this because we're here to talk about managing it, not what causes it. But I think it's important to just note that the cause of fatigue are very multifactorial. So within PNH, obviously there's anemia, there's lots of things going on within the mechanisms within the illness, which might be contributing to fatigue, but also things you're taking either for PNH, the treatments, but also other things you may be taking. So analgesia for pain relief, antiemetics for sickness if you're feeling nauseous at any point, antidepressants. There's lots of things that can contribute to that sense of tiredness and fatigue. Feeling unwell, so infections on top, or being off your feet for a while because you've been unwell, they can also make people feel more fatigued. And then if you have pain, other symptoms going on, pain particularly is quite exhausting for the body, the tension it causes. So as you can see, lots and lots of factors. And I think touching on the emotional state as well, so we will talk about stress and anxiety and how that contributes. But if you think about your emotional state, if you're very stressed or anxious and your body's very tense, that can be very draining for the body. And I've written pushing through here, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but that's a sense of just feeling fatigued, but kind of trying to drive through it and hitting that wall. And actually that's not going to be helping the fatigue. So you're getting into a bit of a spiral with it. So there's lots of things that are contributing to it. Next slide, please, Maria. It is one of the most common symptoms. So it is a very common symptom within PNH, as many of you will know, but across many long-term health conditions, it's a really common symptom. So you may find that you suddenly belong to a club that you never wanted to be part of. You know, you have fatigue, lots of people have fatigue, but sometimes that can be reassuring that you're not alone in this. As I said, it's influenced by a number of factors. So I wish I could kind of recommend a pill to take to make it go away. But unfortunately, because there are so many things contributing, it's more a case of managing it and taking control over it, which is what we're talking about today. And it is difficult to describe. We've had a little bit of a go of trying to describe it, but actually it's very variable. It can be hard for people who haven't experienced fatigue to understand what it's like. So sometimes those people around us who are very well-meaning don't always understand why you can do something one day and not the next, because it is this slightly invisible symptom. And as I say, it might not be possible to take away the fatigue completely, but actually there are very well evidenced strategies which can help to manage it and give you control back over it. So rather than fatigue being this overwhelming barrier in life, I can't do this because I'm feeling too tired, it's a sense of going, well, yes, I'm fatigued, but this is how I'm going to live my life. I'm going to live alongside it. Next slide, please, Maria. So education has been shown to be really important in managing fatigue, just understanding really what it is, thinking about where it's coming from and thinking about how to manage it. And that's what we're doing today. And what we're going to cover is energy conservation. We're going to touch on exercise, relaxation, sleep and nutrition. These are all key areas that through many guidelines, there are no guidelines for managing fatigue through PNH, but there are guidelines for managing chronic fatigue, cancer-related fatigue, and they come across these same interventions. So a lot of what we're talking about today is not going to be kind of groundbreaking, life-changing stuff. It's going to be making small tweaks and changes to the way you do things. So thinking about things in a slightly different way. But making changes can sometimes mean challenging those habits that you've had for a long time, those roles or routines that you have. And that can be difficult because, you know, we've done things in a certain way for a long time, and I'm saying just maybe tweak it. And I acknowledge that that might be difficult. But I can assure you that even small changes can have a really big difference. So just remain open-minded, and even if you can take something small away from this, hopefully it will really help. Thanks, Maria. If we can move on. So some of you may have come across this before. It might feel familiar if I explain it, but this is called the boom and bust cycle. So what tends to happen, and this is a very common cycle, I should say, it's almost unusual if people don't fall into this cycle. But what tends to happen is when you have fatigue, your energy is more limited. You kind of hit that wall of fatigue. So you're doing your activities, you're using your energy, and then suddenly you kind of hit that point where you need to go into a period of recovery. You need to kind of recharge. And then it might take a little while. It might take minutes, it might take hours, it might take days. But when you start to feel better, you go, well, I need to get on with my activity again. I need to kind of get those things done that I haven't been able to do. So you push through again and then hit that wall and then go into another period of recovery. And this is such a common pattern, you might not even realize it, but a lot of people are in this pattern of kind of pushing through until they just feel exhausted and then needing to rest. And although this graph is slightly exaggerated, it is known to be a detrimental pattern. So over time, you have less energy available to do activity, and you spend more time in recovery. So spending more time feeling kind of disabled by the fatigue. And what we want to do is therefore move away from this pattern and get a bit more consistency. So think of it being more like gentle rolling hills rather than this roller coaster of energy use. We really want to try and get a bit more consistency in energy use. And we're going to talk about how to do that. Thanks, Maria. So I want you to imagine your energy in terms of a battery. Many of us will have a mobile phone or another device at home that we can understand, you know, the battery gets depleted when we use it, and then we plug it in and recharge it. So I want to think about your energy like that as well. So some activities are going to drain the battery, going to use the energy, and others are going to recharge it. But importantly, to avoid that boom and bust, we want to keep a little bit in reserve at all times. So stopping before you get tired. And that can be a bit of a tweak and a change the way you do things already. I'd normally try and explore this in a big group, but actually, because of time, I just want you to think to yourself, which activities do you think really drain your battery? There might be things that come straight to mind. They might be physical activities, social, they might be cognitive or emotional things, but there might be things that you think, yeah, that definitely wears me out really quickly. And there might be other activities that recharge you. And sometimes these are the ones that we don't do as much because we feel too tired, but you may be able to think, actually, yeah, sitting down with a nice cup of tea or talking to my best friend or doing some relaxation, those kind of things really give me a boost. And also thinking about, okay, well, if your energy is limited and you know that actually you have to manage your energy levels, how do you want to manage it? What do you want to use your battery for? And how can you make sure it lasts over the day and the week? So managing fatigue is really a case about, yeah, getting in control and going, I'm going to be in control of this battery now and how I use my energy. So I'm going to think about my energy use a little bit more than I may have done before. Can you move forward? Thank you, Emma. So we can do that through energy conservation. And this is the deliberate planned management of an individual's personal energy resources to prevent their depletion. And that means to prevent that kind of boom and bust cycle happening. And what that really means is finding that balance between those activities which deplete your energy and those that boost your energy. And importantly, making the most of the energy you have. So however limited that battery might be, some people have very little battery to work with and others have a bit more, but it's about making the most of the energy in the battery that you have by using it really wisely. And we can do that with these 5 principles of energy conservation, which will helpfully begin with a P. And they're words and principles that you may recognize. They're not, as I say, they're not kind of rocket science type ideas, but we're really trying to apply them to energy use. So we're going to go through those principles now. Thanks, Maria. So prioritizing and planning, this is really key because if your energy is more limited, it's thinking, well, okay, what is important? What's important? What do I have to do? There may be appointments, there might be work or university or roles or routines that you hold that you have to do. Even just getting up and washed and dressed and getting your food and your laundry, all those things, we have to try and fit them in. But what do you really want to do as well? What's actually going to make your quality of life feel enhanced? What can you plan in that maybe has got dropped off the list? Are there hobbies? Are there things that you enjoy? Sometimes those can get forgotten when we're fatigued. So thinking about what's really important, what you value doing, because some of those things might actually give you a boost and make your energy feel a little bit more. And then planning is really key. So there may be times of the day which are best for you. There may be days of the week around particular roles that you have which are best for you. And so I often encourage people to really sit down and think about space and activities out during the day and over the week. So there's not too much in one day. We're not having a really busy day and thinking, well, that's okay because I'll just rest the next day, because that's the boom bust pattern. Is there any way that you can spread things out? And you may not be able to do that all the time. Sometimes, you know, an event comes up or a big family celebration, and you have to kind of push through, and that's okay. You may have to boom and bust, but if you can avoid it the majority of the time and then just do it, you know, if it needs to happen, if you can try and plan a little bit more using energy, it can be really helpful. Thanks, Maria. So pacing and positioning. If you have mentioned fatigue to a clinician, they may have told you to pace yourself. It's one of the most kind of common. Pace yourself. Pacing is really important. And without understanding or kind of explanation, it can often just feel a bit frustrating, like you're being told not to do as much. And we have busy lives, there's things you need to do. But it really means doing the things you need to do in a way where you're just kind of breaking it down a bit more. So taking regular rest breaks. So balancing activity and rest. Maybe doing a little bit of activity, having a rest break, even just 5 minutes, doing something to calm your body down and allow your mind and body to rest, and then doing the next bit of activity. An example might be doing the food shopping. So it might be quite a lot of energy to write the list, go shopping, come home, unpack the car, unload the shopping, all those things. Could it be that you break that activity down into small tasks where you write the list the day before, you go shopping at a time that you've planned is going to be quite good in terms of your energy levels. And then when you get home, rather than unloading everything, you just unload the frozen stuff and then you go and sit down for a bit. And then maybe 10 minutes later, you go back and you unload the fridge stuff and then you sit down for a bit longer. And then when you kind of re-energize, you can go back and unload the other. So it's just a case of breaking things down. Yes, slow down if it's helpful, absolutely. Sometimes we're going at a certain pace and sometimes we just need to kind of check whether we're using more energy than we need. And adapting activities to be more energy efficient. So really thinking about finding energy efficiencies within tasks. And that can come into positioning. So we know that sitting down to do tasks can use less energy than standing. So it may be sitting down when you're brushing your teeth or getting washed, sitting down to chop the vegetables, prepare food, or sitting down when you're waiting for the kettle to boil. And these may seem like really small little energy savers throughout the day, but actually when you add them all up, they're going to be really helping that battery go a bit further. Next, please, Maria. And then the last principle is permission. I think this is a really key one. I've had lots of patients with fatigue say to me they feel they're being lazy, or other thing people, you know, might think they're being lazy, or they feel they're not, or they might be letting people down. There's lots of negative emotion that comes with fatigue. But I think actually it's permission to let yourself off the hook. So if you are struggling with fatigue, that's just what you're struggling with, and you may have to manage it in a way that someone without fatigue, you know, doesn't have to manage. And it's okay to make these changes, okay to do things in a slightly different way in order to manage that. Fatigue can often make us feel like we can't do things as well. So recognizing what you are able to do. So some of you may have been very fatigued this morning, but you've turned up. And there may be things each day that you're doing despite the fatigue. And I guess it's recognizing those achievements and patting yourself on the back. Setbacks will happen. So in fatigue management, things can be going swimmingly and an infection might happen. You'll feel more fatigued again. But almost understanding that that's the natural part of it can help be reassuring and less alarming when they do happen. And knowing that actually the skills aren't taken away, so you can get back on track with your fatigue management again. It's also permission to delegate and to ask for help or to accept help when it's offered, which is not always easy. And certainly permission to say no to things that might take you over your kind of limit and energy use. Thank you, Maria. So there's a very practical tool we're going to go into next, which is a way of kind of exploring energy use in depth and then seeing how you can apply these principles, because it's one thing to say them, but it's another thing to think, how can you apply them to your life? So we'll move on to the activity diary. The first part of this diary is really kind of drilling down even more into the energy cost of activities. So we've touched on which activities deplete and restore or recharge. This is really spreading it over more. So which activities do you find really drain that battery, very quickly? And which activities, yes, they use some energy, but they're quite manageable. So it might be kind of watching TV. And then what are those activities that restore you? And often this is the shortest list. And if we can move on, I've got some examples on here, but they really are just examples. Your list would be completely personal to you. But again, it shows here in the examples that it's not just physical activities, it's remembering that things like emotional stress or going to university, all those things, all those cognitive things can be very exhausting as well. And this is a dynamic list. So although I'd encourage you to fill in a list like this, really the point of this is to just start to think about the energy cost of things. So when you're then going to plan your activities for the day, you've got a little bit of understanding about what those activities are going to cost you in terms of your battery, and therefore how to spread them out and plan them. But it also allows you to maybe add a little bit more of those green activities, because often that's the shortest list that people have. So thinking, is there anything else I can do to try and take a rest break in the day? Is it just going to sit outside and just listen to the birds? Can I just add that in? And then when you've made this list, understanding that you will make it, but it's still dynamic. There may be other days, some days that feel worse or better, and so some things may change categories. But starting with this list, you can then start to fill out the diary. So if we move on to the diary page, it's a very simple diary, days of the week, hours of the day. You can use this, you will be sent a copy of the slide, so you can use this or make your own, and a color coding at the bottom. So we've got those different energy activities and then sleep. And if we move a slide further, we can often see what diaries look like when people start filling them in. This may not be your pattern, this is just an example, but quite often we see people with these really big chunks of red activity where people have kind of got up and rushed around and done the things they need to do, and kind of fulfilling those roles and their normal activities. And then as the week goes on, the sleep becomes more erratic. There's maybe more naps in the day, there's sleeping in the mornings at the weekend, there's going to bed earlier because people are feeling more exhausted. There's very little green and rest in there. And as the week goes on, we can kind of see that bust, really. People have boomed at the beginning of the week and busted at the end. This may be familiar to it, maybe nothing like your pattern, but it's just an example to show the kind of things that we often see in our clinic. And what we'd like to get to is the next slide, which is where things have been changed a little bit by using those principles of energy conservation. So one thing here is that actually sleep is a little bit more regular, and we'll talk about sleep shortly. Naps in the day are reduced, there's a better quality of sleep from having that regular sleep. But also you can see that the big chunks of high energy activity are just broken down. So they're spread out over the week, they're paced because you're having those regular rest breaks, and there's a real kind of changing and balancing between the different types of energy activities. And actually on both of these diaries, there are the same amount of red squares. So the person isn't doing any less, they're just doing it in a way which they kind of embrace energy conservation. And so they're not feeling by the weekend like they're feeling unwell in bed. They're still able to get on with what they need to do because they've just spread things out, they've paced themselves, they've planned a little bit more. And this doesn't happen overnight. So I'm not saying that, that was week 1, this is week 2. This is something that often takes a few weeks or months to just start to use those principles until you can start to see a more balanced use of energy. And therefore, people have got that quality of life. They're doing all those things they want to do, but not feeling so fatigued, especially not feeling so disabled by that fatigue. I hope that's making some sense. So the next slide is, if you want to go a step further, you may just find that exploring your energy kind of cost of activities and exploring the diary and tweaking it may be a really good thing to do if you're really struggling with fatigue. And the next kind of step would be working out how much activity you can do before you kind of exacerbate, and that's called your baseline. So the benefits of this are, rather than just doing something in a day and then hitting that kind of fatigue wall and needing to recover, you start to understand how much you can do before you start to feel tired, where you know when to stop. So it reduces those energy fluctuations, and then you can then plan a bit more and go, well, I know how much energy I've got today, so I can plan my week. I know when I can say yes to a friend because I know that's going to be within that limit, within my baseline. And baselines can change over time. So rather than this detrimental pattern where we find with boom and bust, we have less energy and more time recovery, If you're using your energy more consistently, your body starts to just get used to that and go, okay, I get this now. I'm not being pushed on my limits, I need to recover. I'm getting used to using the same amount of energy each day. This feels more comfortable. And therefore, hopefully, you can start to build that up over time. So working out your baseline. I don't want this to be a maths lesson. I apologize if it ends up being like that, but there are two approaches. The very simple approach is to count the red squares in a week and divide it by the number of days in the week. So 49 red squares divided by 7 would be 7 hours as your new baseline. So from that very first diary, we saw at the beginning of the week, there were 12 hours of red, and then it kind of reduced and it was only 1 to 2 hours of red by the weekend. On the second diary we saw, when it was all paced out a bit more, there were 7 hours each day with rest breaks. So someone was just going, that's my baseline. If I go over that, I'm going to feel really exhausted and I'm going to have to recover tomorrow. So I'm going to stick to my 7 hours each day. And that may be holding back. You may think I've got a bit more energy or I've got to do this thing. But actually it's that permission to make those changes, permission to put yourself first and to tell people around you, actually, I need to just stick to this today because then I'm going to feel better tomorrow. I'm going to have to do more tomorrow as well. Another way to look at baselines is for each activity. And I often have patients who say, well, how long can I go walking for? Yes, I've got 7 hours, but how long can I do this particular activity for? Because it often makes me feel really tired, that particular activity. So you can look at baselines within activities as well. For example, kind of recording how long you can do an activity before you feel tired, and then just sticking to 80% of that. So holding a little bit in reserve. So example here is reading for 10 minutes, make you feel tired. So from now on, stick to reading for 8 minutes. And again, it might be that holding back and that change, which can feel frustrating, it can feel challenging, but these small things can make a big difference to your energy levels. So that's kind of two different ways of working out baselines. I'm hoping that's making sense. I've seen a couple of nods, so that's good. So we're going to move back onto this kind of idea of the emotional state and how stress can impact fatigue. So stress is a really normal part of life. And we have this evolutionary response built in our stress response, which is the sympathetic nervous system, or the fight, flight, and freeze mechanism. So what happens when we perceive a threat or get stressed is that physiologically our body changes, where we have a rush of adrenaline and cortisol. We get the blood rushing to our big muscles, so we're ready to run away or fight. Our heart rate increases, our respiratory rate increases, all these things happen, and we're suddenly kind of tense and ready to go. And that can be really helpful. If you step into the road, a car's coming, it enables you to jump right out again. You know, that response kicks in almost before you've thought about it. But unfortunately, in modern life, our stress response is triggered a lot by looking at the news, by worrying about what we've got to do the next day, by relationships that we've got. Sometimes that stress response is triggered at a kind of lower level a lot, and we find that we're carrying tension, and that physiologically we've got all these things going on which are wearing down the battery. So you can see hopefully how learning strategies to control the symptoms of that response can help to reduce the impact of stress and anxiety on fatigue, but also being able to control that response can help manage stress and anxiety. So I think there's a win-win for managing kind of the anxiety side of things, but also managing the impact it has on energy levels. So we'll talk about how to do that in a moment, but I just wanted to give you some tips on the next slide. If you are feeling really overwhelmed or overloaded, it's important to think about managing that. So, you know, often people say, I just feel so overwhelmed, I can't talk, you know, people are talking at me and I can't take it in. You know, there's so many things to do, it just feels too much. And it's okay to inform others. Again, it's that permission, you know, give yourself permission to let other people know. Do you need to say to someone, I really want to hear what you're saying, it's really interesting, I'm just too tired at the moment, can I have a short break and come back to it? People might appreciate that more than you staring at them blankly, not taking it in. Cutting out distractions. As I mentioned, there's so much kind of sensory stimulus with everything that's going on. Sometimes just allowing yourself a little bit more quiet, a little bit more space can help with that mental exhaustion. And if you are finding that your fatigue, is affecting you cognitively, so really struggling with concentration, you know, you're reading the same line in a book again and again, not taking it in, or it's affecting your memory in some way, then using compensatory strategies, so writing lists, using diaries or calendars. Sometimes people will have a whiteboard or a chalkboard at home for important information they want to remember, or using a notepad. So some people may be making notes now, you will get a copy of the slides, But I often say, if you're going to an appointment, take a notepad with you, write down things you want to say before you go, because if you're feeling tired, again, it may be harder to remember. So art and craft activities, I want to make a small mention on this. There's some evidence to show that art and craft activities can help to restore energy and reduce this mental side of fatigue. And we think it's because people just get really into the flow of an activity. It's almost kind of mindful. So when you're getting into a particular kind of creative activity, it can really be very absorbing, and that can be very helpful. So if you do have any hobbies that you have done before, that you do now, or you'd like to get into, they may actually be helpful in terms of managing that mental fatigue as well. But we're going to talk about kind of relaxation. And we call it effective rest and relaxation, because obviously a lot of us will think, I just relax. You know, I watched a kind of box set on the TV. I find it really relaxing. I sit down with a cup of tea with a friend. That's really calming. But all those things I'd say are probably more low energy activities. We're thinking about things, we're, you know, engaged in something. And effective rest and relaxation is that sense of really giving both your mind and your body a rest, allowing tension to drop away, allowing all that stuff that's going on to just settle. It is a learned skill, and sometimes when people are stressed, other people will tell them to relax, and that's actually more frustrating because you can't just relax. You have to kind of learn how to do it. And for many of us, including myself, I'm still learning. I use some of the things I'm going to talk about, but it's still a skill that I'm honing. But it does get easier with practice. And so I'd often say to people if you want to start using relaxation, try and plan it into your daily routine, even just 5 minutes a day. And then just keep at it, keep practicing, and you'll find that more easily over time, you'll be able to kind of tap into that relaxation. And then when you need to use it, when you're stressed, again, it's a tool that you can more easily use. So relaxation not only helps to reduce all that muscle tension that's building, you know, that's draining the battery by just keeping our muscles tense, so releasing that so you've got more battery to use, but it also can give people a sense of control. So it's something that you can do on your own, almost any time of day, with little or no resources. So it's something that you can do. You can take control of a situation, and you can do to help manage your fatigue without anyone else doing anything for you. So a lot of people have mentioned that actually that's something that they feel, yes, this is what I do now. It's really giving that sense of control. And this is backed up by evidence. There is evidence to show that mindfulness and relaxation practice can be really restorative and help with topping up energy levels. So if you're thinking about those recharge moments in the day, it may be that engaging in some kind of effective relaxation may be really helpful. And the next slide shows some different relaxation techniques. So things like visualization, imagining yourself in a really calm or happy place. And there are lots of guided imagery or guided visualizations out there. Progressive muscle relaxation, also sometimes called body scanning, and that's the deliberate tensing and releasing of muscles from head to toe. This one is really good actually to do in the evening before bed, or if you wake up in the night and you can't go back to sleep, and it's often used with people with insomnia, so a really good relaxation technique. Breathing and focusing on the breath, so counting breaths, all those things can be very calming. It takes your mind away from anything else that's going on, so it can be a really good focus within the body. But abdominal breathing as well can stimulate the vagus nerve and what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. So I mentioned the stress response being the sympathetic nervous system. It kind of winds everything up, ready to go. The parasympathetic nervous system is that like a parachute to bring everything back down. So abdominal breathing can stimulate that. So even just taking a few really deep breaths down into the tummy, the diaphragm, could just help physiologically calm your system. So if nothing else, just throughout the day, remembering to just take those moments can sometimes be really helpful. It may be that you have particular favorite art or photos of friends or holidays or images that you find very calming to look at, or music that you enjoy that makes you feel very relaxed, or things like massage, stroking, soft touch. All those things can be very calming as well. And mindfulness, even though it isn't really classed as a relaxation technique, it's often very relaxing. So focusing awareness on the present moment gets you out of worrying about the future, ruminating about the past, and just being very much aware that in the moment, there are no problems to worry about. So mindfulness can be a very powerful tool, and there's lots of evidence to support it for managing fatigue, managing pain, managing low mood and anxiety. So lots of things out there that mindfulness can be helpful for. And there are some apps available for those who use apps on your phones or computers or tablets. Headspace and Calm are two well-known ones. For anyone working in the NHS, Headspace is free to use. But for everyone else, it's free to download, and there's some free content on there. And then if you want to subscribe for more of the exercises, then there is a subscription fee. If that's not possible, then there are lots of free content. If you just Google some of these things like guided imagery visualization, progressive muscle relaxation, Google some of those, even mindfulness. Mindfulness has actually quite a lot of information on NHS websites. So you just Google it and there's lots of resources around mindfulness. So lots of free things out there that you can try as well. And even local libraries often have things like CDs and books about these things as well. But I certainly recommend giving it a go. So I know this is a bit of a whistle stop. I'm just aware of time as well. But I think it's important to just mention nutrition. And with Fatigue Manager, it's really just getting enough fuel for the body. So we wouldn't think about driving from London to Scotland on a quarter of a tank of petrol. But sometimes people kind of try and get through the day when they're skipping meals or they're too tired to get the next thing. And we need to keep enough fuel in our body to have enough energy to do the things we want. So avoid skipping meals and ensuring you've got enough food and fluid intake to keep you going. Fluid especially, sometimes when we're dehydrated, we can start to feel a bit foggy and tired before we start to feel thirsty. So regular fluid intake. Thinking about nutrition as well. Again, when people are fatigued, it's sometimes reaching for those kind of sugar, caffeine, carb fixes. It's really easy. It's because our body goes, hang on, I'm tired, I need energy, I need quick fix energy. Your body's craving those things. But actually, if you can make sure that you're really thinking about your nutrition, it can help. I'm not saying you have to avoid quick fixes or sugar or caffeine. If you find that you're relying on them to get through the day, it might be that they're actually increasing those fluctuations. You're having the caffeine boost and the caffeine crash, or the sugar on dose. So sometimes that can be making you have these little boom and bust. So it may be a case of minimizing those and thinking about rest periods or different nutrition or slow release energy instead. But also when it comes to nutrition, thinking about the energy it takes to prepare food. So batch cooking can be really helpful to think about cooking a really healthy meal, putting some of it in fridge or freezer to have another day. There are some really good ready meals and convenience foods out there these days. And adapting your food preparation. So again, it might be that standing in the kitchen at 6 o'clock cooking a meal is just too much at that time of day. So could you chop some vegetables in the morning? Could you kind of make a bit of a sauce in the afternoon, 10 minutes here or there? And then in the evening, it's a case of putting it together. Could you break down that activity into small tasks to ensure you're having that good meal and good nutrition, but in a way that's not going to exacerbate your fatigue? So it's quite a short bit on nutrition, but hopefully that makes some sense. We're going to talk about sleep as well, because obviously we all know if you have a bad night's sleep, you're going to have less energy and feel more tired. But having fatigue can also sometimes bring about sleep disturbance when people start to kind of do too little in the day or sleep too much in the day. The quality of the sleep at night is affected. So having a really regular sleep-wake pattern can be helpful. And that means kind of waking up and going to sleep roughly within about an hour each day, rather than having big lions on some days and going to bed early on some days. Listen to your body. This might not happen overnight. You might need to tweak your sleep routine to get from where you are, if it is an unhealthy routine, to a more positive routine. And that might happen gradually. But the ideal is to try and have this regular sleep-wake pattern and try to avoid sleeping too much during the day. So again, listen to your body. If you've been unwell, if you have slept poorly, absolutely nap in the day. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but if you're doing it too often, it can affect the quality as well as the quantity of your sleep at night. Winding down before bed can be really important. So avoiding screen time. The blue light from screens can suppress the sleep hormone melatonin and make us not feel sleepy. So trying to have some time before bed when you haven't got any screens. You might be reading, doing puzzles, doing some stretches, having a bath, doing something else, doing some relaxation. All those kind of things can just help set us up for better sleep. And that can therefore mean that we have more energy the next day. And there's some sleep hygiene things on here as well. So, avoiding certain things like stimulants or sugars that are going to keep you awake before bed, and keeping your room somewhere that feels calm, that feels uncluttered. that is just for sleep rather than kind of work if possible, and that is a good temperature, it's nice and dark and quiet. So you're having that really kind of lovely space to go to sleep, really. We are moving through things quickly, but it's really important to talk about exercise, because again, I think it's such and then with the evidence base as well, it's such a key thing in managing fatigue. And exercise can feel like a scary word to someone who's really struggling with their energy levels, but I'm talking about exercise and activities. It's not just the formal exercise, it's, you know, being active, doing the housework, doing the gardening, all those things. But it has been shown that graded and moderate regular exercise can improve the symptoms of fatigue. So moderate intensity exercise is that where you're getting your heart rate up a little bit, you're getting a little bit out of breath, but you can still hold the conversation, even in broken sentences. High intensity, you wouldn't be able to talk. And low intensity, you're doing some activity, but you can kind of chat quite normally like I am. So that moderate intensity where you're getting a little bit out of breath is what you're kind of aiming for. And graded is starting small, finding a level of activity or exercise that feels manageable now on a daily basis, something that's enjoyable, obviously, because that's going to increase your motivation to do it, and then gradually building up over time. So not going, right, I don't do any exercise, I've been told to do it, so I'm just going to go for a run. That's probably going to be a big leap. So starting somewhere small and building up. Many of you may be doing some great levels of exercise already to keep yourself fit and healthy. So keep doing that, thinking about, you know, managing the activity and rest balance as well. Exercise can also release endorphins, which can give you a real boost of energy and boost the mood, make you feel more motivated. And if moderate intensity exercise feels too much, then there are some really good low intensity exercises, things like yoga, Tai Chi and Qigong, really good for gentle exercise, also managing breath work, which is quite calming. But they're very good for strengthening and stretching, so keeping muscles strong without that high intensity or moderate intensity. So that may be somewhere to start as well. The next slide, I get this a lot, so there's been a contradiction. So on the one hand, you're telling me to exercise, on the other hand, you're telling me to pace myself. This just feels like two different messages. But actually, exercise helps keep the muscles strong, so the body's working in the most efficient way. And managing your energy levels by things like pacing is helping to make the best use of energy within your body, also ensuring it's working in the most efficient way. So they're actually working together to just find efficiencies and make sure that you are working efficiently, you're managing your energy and your body efficiently. So stronger muscles make lighter work of tasks. We're keeping ourselves fit so that we're managing our energy levels. But there is a balance that's needed, and this is shown a little bit more on the next slide. So activity of any sort, whether that's your kind of daily activities, your laundry and your shopping and you're moving around the house, or exercise, needs to be balanced with conserving energy. So yes, it's really important to build body efficiency, to be active. We don't want people to rest too much because then they become deconditioned. We want people to keep their body fit. It needs to be balanced with this conserving energy and building energy efficiency so you get really good at using your battery. And only you will know where that balance is. So I can be here to say that both of these things are good, and then whatever balance feels right for you. But I think it's important to keep this kind of ABC in mind when you are being active or you are thinking about conserving your energy. I'm not telling you to just rest or just be active. There's a definite balance here. And the reason for this is, you know, people can become deconditioned, and there's a cycle of deconditioning, which is quite well known. So people feel very exhausted by their condition, by their fatigue. They don't feel like doing anything. They feel activity is just going to make me feel worse. Why would I do something when I'm feeling this exhausted? So activity becomes reduced, and that can lead to a physical deconditioning, so muscles becoming weaker, but also a sense of emotional deconditioning. We kind of lose the drive to do things. We lose motivation. It can make us not feel as good about ourselves. We're not doing the things we want to do. And then that leads to a further reduction in activity. So it becomes this kind of downward spiral. And what we want to do is break that spiral and turn it into the cycle of reconditioning, which is on the next slide, which is more of an upward spiral. So we want a gradual return to activity. You may already be active. If you're not, this might be a place to start. So setting achievable goals is a really good way to kind of unlock this and turn the spiral around. Because by setting a goal around being active, you're going to be increasing your strength, your endurance in doing something, however small that goal is. You get that increase in mental well-being because you've done something, you've achieved something, it feels good. And then that will help you to further increase your activity. So it becomes an upward spiral. Next slide, please, Miriam. I'm aware, sorry, at the time. I won't go into this in great detail, but we've talked a little bit about finding what's important for you and really exploring your values. But values can be very helpful in setting your goals. So value will give us a sense of direction. It gives us that kind of what we really want to do, where we want to go, who we want to be. And then the goals are those little destinations along the way. So it might be that I really value going south and France is my next destination. So it's the goal is there going to France. So being in nature might be a value, going to the park as a goal. And so we're really thinking about setting goals which are based on our values. And setting goals can be really effective for managing low energy because they're a way of focusing your energy on something which is really important. What is my goal? What do I want to focus on at the moment? And it means things get done. The next slide on goal setting and goals you've probably seen before, using SMART goals, making sure things are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant. So does it align with who you want to be, what's important, what your values are, and then time bound. You'll have this slide, so I'm not going to go through it. You've probably heard of SMART goals before. But what I want to leave you with is a little bit of homework that I'm not going to check up on, but this is just for you to think, well, I've got all this education now, but what do I do with it? So perhaps think of what you do value. Is there something that's actually important to you? What direction do you want to travel in from here? And it might not be anything to do with fatigue management, but this is just a way of thinking about it. And then start thinking about a values-based goal you'd like to set yourself just in a month. So what would you like to achieve in a month? If it is around fatigue management, it might be exploring relaxation or using the diary, or it could be anything within your life. Use the page in this to ensure it's smart. So thinking about that, make a plan, go back to planning. We're not just going to do things when we've got low energy. We have to plan and make sure it's going to fit in with our energy use, and then just try your best.